Before entering the story, please subscribe to the channel, like and share to help me. Thank you. The more you say nothing, the more they obsess. There's a strange power in silence that most people never learn to use. While the world screams for attention, likes, validation, noise, you stay quiet. And in that quiet, something interesting happens. They start watching. They start wondering. They start obsessing. When you speak less, you give less away. No one knows what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you feel. And that makes people uncomfortable because most rely on reaction to feel control. Silence breaks that cycle. It puts you in the position of power. The less you explain, the more they try to figure you out. Every time you pull back, you create space for curiosity. And curiosity is powerful. It keeps you in their head. They replayed your words, your pauses, your absence. They analyze your energy, your body, language, your silence. Not because you force them to, but because they need to. Because silence makes them feel something they can't define. In a world addicted to noise, being unbothered is magnetic. Silence says, I don't need to prove myself. It says, I control my frame, not you. It doesn't just show strength, it is strength. And here's the thing, most people don't understand. You don't know everyone your presence. You don't need to explain your mood. You don't have to justify your decisions. People think silence means weakness or disinterest. But when it's used with intention, silence becomes a weapon. It makes them chase, it makes them think, it makes them uncomfortable. Because they're used to access, and when you take that access, away they spiral. Silence challenges egos. It disrupts emotional control, especially when they're used to you reacting. Suddenly, your lack of response becomes louder than any words you could have said. They feel your absence more than they ever valued your presence. This is where obsession begins. Not with noise, not with argument, but with distance, with mystery, with power held, not given. The moment you stop playing their game, you start leading your own. You stop being predictable. And in that space, you become unforgettable. Because mystery has a gravitational pull. People are drawn to what they can't read. You could have answered, you could have but you didn't. And now they're left with questions. And questions grow in silence. They echo, they multiply, until all they can do is think about you. The power isn't in what you say, it's in what you don't say. It's in holding your ground when others lose theirs. It's in showing that your energy is earned, not given freely. That's where the dynamic shifts. That's where the tables turn. That's when they start seeing you differently, because now you're no longer reacting to the world. The world is reacting to you. You've become the variable they can't control. And that scares people, because most live for predictability. They want to know what buttons to push, what words will get a rise, what moves will force a response. But when you say nothing, they lose that map. They're left in the dark, reaching for a pattern that no longer exists. That's when they start projecting. They assign meaning to your silence. They'll say you're arrogant, cold, distant, but that's not on you. That's them wrestling with their own need for validation. You've simply removed yourself from the chaos. Understand this, when you're silent, you stay clean. No drama, no over-explaining, no unnecessary tension. You protect your energy. You guard your peace. And in doing so, you shift the dynamic in every room you walk into. They start leaning in, trying to read your face, your eyes, your intent, because your silence speaks. Louder than noise, stronger than confrontation, more lasting than any emotional outburst ever could. This isn't about manipulation, it's about mastery. Mastery of yourself, your reactions, your presence. You don't need to announce your value. You are the value. Let them wonder, let them talk, let them obsess. Because the truth is, what's rare gets attention. And silence, in today's world, is the rarest move you can make. You show up, calm, grounded, unshaken, and suddenly, everyone else is scrambling to decode what you're thinking. They fill in the blanks with their own insecurities, their own projections, their own guilt. Meanwhile, you stay focused, composed, unbothered, and that is exactly when they start needing you more than you ever needed them. Because now, they're emotionally invested without even realizing why. The more they try to get a reaction, the more confused they become. The more you withhold, the more they chase. You've flipped the script without saying a single word. And in that silence, you've made them feel something deeper than attention. You've made them feel absence, and absence lingers. It forces people to sit with themselves, to question, to regret, to replay every moment you gave them access to your energy. And that's where the obsession really begins. They never forget it. It lingers. Not in their ears, but in their mind. Because when you carry yourself with quiet strength, you don't just walk into rooms differently, you leave echoes when you walk out. They remember the way you didn't flinch, the way you didn't beg, the way you didn't explain yourself. That calm, stoic presence. It burns into memory. Because most people are loud when they're insecure, but deadly silent when they're in control. That's why silence works. It creates pressure. It forces people to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And in that space, their minds fill in the gaps. They start crafting stories, scenarios, outcomes. They become emotionally attached to assumptions, all because you refuse to hand them certainty. And while they obsess over why you're quiet, you stay sharp, you stay dangerous. Because your silence is an emptiness. It's a signal, a message that says, I'm not available for games. I don't react, I move with intent. If you want access, earn it. You stop justifying your presence. You stop giving pieces of yourself to people who never deserved the full picture. Because your time, your mind, your energy, it's premium. It's not for everyone. And the moment they realize that, the obsession deepens. That's when they double back. That's when the texts start coming. The apologies, the sudden interest. Not because they've changed, but because your absence exposed what your presence was really worth. You didn't need to convince them. You just needed to remove yourself. And that silence, that changed everything. Because now they realize you weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you knew your value. And that silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. It was focus. It was power held back, not because you lacked it, but because you no longer needed to prove it. And the longer you hold that line, the more they crave a response. Not because they deserve it, but because they can't stand not having it. And that's the edge. That's the leverage. When they obsess, and you stay unmoved, because that's the final form of discipline. Not needing to react, even when you know you could shatter them with a single sentence. That restraint, that calm in the chaos, that's what separates the ones who lead from the ones who follow. They expected noise. They expected drama. They expected the same emotional spiral they've seen 100 times before. But you didn't give them what they were ready for. You gave them nothing. And that nothing, it became everything. They check your profile. They scan your last words. They try to decode your silence like it's a secret message. But you've already moved on. Because while they're stuck in the past, you're building your future. You see, silence is a test, and most people fail it. They break under the weight of not being heard. They panic when they're not seen. But you're built different. You don't need validation to feel solid. You don't need approval to feel real. You've trained yourself to be enough without the noise. That's rare. That's power. That's why they obsess. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you become a mystery. When you stop arguing, you become unshakable. And when you stop chasing, they start chasing you. You're not cold. You're focused. You're not detached. You're just not accessible to everyone anymore. And that boundary, that invisible wall, they can't climb anymore. That drives them mad. Because people want access to what they can't have. And the more you stay quiet, the more valuable you become in their mind. Not because you changed, but because they finally saw the weight of your silence. And now they're stuck. Stuck wondering what you're thinking, what you're doing, if you're ever coming back. But by the time they figure it out, you're already in a different season. Already elevating. Already locked in on something bigger than them. And all they're left with is the sound of their own questions, echoing in the silence you left behind. And that silence becomes punishment they gave themselves. Because you didn't cut them off with anger. You didn't need to explode, explain, or defend. You simply disappeared with dignity. No chaos, no closure. Just distance and discipline. That hits harder than any argument ever could. Now they crave a piece of your attention, a glance, a word, anything. Because once you go silent, everything you withhold gains weight. Every reply you don't send becomes a message. Every moment of stillness becomes a reflection of power. And here's what they begin to learn. The loudest one isn't always the strongest. The one who holds back, who knows when not to speak, that's the one who's in control. Silence strips the weak. It exposes insecurities. It creates a vacuum they rush to fill with excuses, theories, regret. And all the while, you stay grounded. You stay in motion. Because you never stopped. You just stopped giving them front row seats to your life. And that's where it flips. When your silence forces them to become their own enemy, not because you played a game, but because you stopped playing at all. There's a deep respect that grows in your absence. A delayed realization. At first, they call it ego. Then, they call it distance. But eventually, they call it strength. Because real presence doesn't scream. It doesn't chase. It doesn't prove. It commands through restraint, through energy, through the discipline to say, I know who I am, even in silence. And as they keep replaying every moment, rewriting every word, questioning every step, you've already moved to a level they no longer have access to. Not out of spite, but out of standard. Because when you stop talking and start becoming, you stop living for their reaction and start living for your legacy. That's when everything changes. Because now, your silence isn't just about holding power, it's about protecting it. You realize that not everyone deserves to hear your thoughts. Not everyone earns a front row seat to your evolution. And the more you grow, the more selective you become with your energy, your words, your time. They used to know the version of you that needed to be understood. The one that tried to make peace. But that version, he's gone, buried in the silence. What stands in his place now is calm, decisive, unshaken. A man who speaks when it matters and remains quiet when it doesn't. Because silence is no longer just a tactic. It's a lifestyle. It's a commitment to move differently, to speak less but mean more. To protect your mission from the noise of the unqualified. Let them wonder. Let them scroll, reread. Let them feel what it's like to lose access to what was once freely given. You gave presence, you gave loyalty, you gave clarity. And when they didn't value it, you took back the most powerful thing you own, your attention. And when you take that away, not in anger, but in silence, you force the world to recognize your worth. Not because you shouted louder, but because you disappeared quieter. And now they're watching the man who no longer needs applause to keep moving forward. The man who creates impact without needing credit. The man who doesn't perform for attention because he owns the room by simply not chasing it. So keep building, keep elevating, keep moving in silence. Let your discipline make the noise for you. And let their obsession grow in the space where your words used to be. Because eventually, they'll realize it wasn't the silence that hurt them. It was the fact that you never needed to break it. You weren't waiting to be begged. You weren't hoping to be understood. You were gone mentally, emotionally, spiritually long before they noticed. And now, they sit in the silence. You mastered a silence they thought was temporary, but was actually your See, when a man becomes focused, truly focused, he detaches from anything that interrupts the mission. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, because clarity makes decisions easy, and silence protects those decisions from being corrupted. You're not unavailable out of pride. You're unavailable because you're becoming something rare. And what's rare is never loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. Let them feel the absence. Let them search for the version of you they once had unlimited access to. That version was generous, maybe even too generous. But this version moves with intention. This version doesn't speak to be heard, he speaks to lead. And sometimes, leadership looks like silence. Like walking away, like leaving the door closed and not looking back. That's when the obsession turns into respect. Because real men don't chase moments. They build momentum. They let their results speak louder than their opinions. And when the world finally catches on, you're already miles ahead. Silent, focused, untouchable. You're no longer part of their drama. You've become part of their story. The one that made them rethink everything. The one that didn't respond, and yet said everything they needed to hear. So stay silent. Stay sharp. Let your discipline echo through every space you no longer occupy. Let your presence be felt without ever saying a word. Because when your silence comes from strength, when it's rooted in vision, anchored in purpose, it's no longer just silence. It's strategy. And by the time they realize the value of what they lost, you've already become the man they never saw coming. Because that's what silence does when it's backed by growth. It turns absence into impact. You don't need revenge. You don't need to be loud. You just need to evolve in plain sight and say nothing. Let your progress scream in the places your voice used to echo. The world keeps watching, wondering how you stay so calm, so unmoved. But what they don't realize is, you already won the moment you chose peace over proving a point, silence over chaos, focus over validation. You stopped explaining yourself because you started knowing yourself. And once a man knows who he is, he stops performing for people who never saw him clearly in the first place. That's the shift. That's the moment the obsession begins. They replay your stillness, your pauses, that last look you gave before you walked away. They remember the words you didn't say, and they carry more weight than anything you could have spoken. Now every room you used to be in feels colder. Every conversation you used to be part of feels emptier, because your presence wasn't just energy. It was leadership. It was stability. It was presence with purpose. And when you left, you didn't just leave with silence. You left with power. You chose distance over drama, growth over gossip, legacy over attention. And that silence, it planted seeds they didn't even realize were growing until now, when they can't stop thinking about you. And while they sit there, playing old memories, like searching for signs, desperate for a reaction. You're locked in, creating, becoming, and refusing to look back, not out of anger, but because your future is speaking louder than anything the past ever said. And in that silence, in that quiet mastery, in that calm execution, they realize they didn't just lose you. They lost access to a man who doesn't need noise to be remembered. Because once you master the art of walking away quietly, you stop being a moment in someone's life. You become a standard they can't meet again. Every future interaction gets measured against your absence. Every new voice gets compared to your silence. They won't admit it out loud, but they feel it. The weight of losing someone who didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't fold. You became the reminder, not of pain, but of discipline, of self, of how dangerous a man becomes when he no longer reacts, he builds. And that's what separates you now. You don't rise and fall with opinions. You're steady. You've moved from emotional chaos to internal clarity. And that makes you rare. uncommon, unreachable by the same tactics that used to distract you. They'll talk, they'll spin stories, they'll try to poke at the silence, hoping to break it. But the version of you they knew, he's been replaced, upgraded, refined through stillness, forged in solitude. Because silence has a way of sharpening the mind. It drowns out the noise. It exposes the unnecessary, and it realigns your focus on what actually matters. So while they obsess over what they lost, you double down on everything you're building. You train harder, think clearer, move smarter. Because you're not playing small anymore. You're playing forever. And the truth is, you never needed them to understand. You just needed space to evolve, to expand beyond what they could handle. To show, through silence, that real strength isn't in resistance. It's in the refusal to be pulled back into a world you've already outgrown. They'll keep trying to reconnect, to explain, to revisit. But by then, it won't matter. Because while they were obsessed with getting your attention back, you were busy becoming someone they no longer have the capacity to access. And that's the final blow. Silence delivers. Closure without conversation. Because freedom is what they never expected you to find. They thought your silence was hesitation, when really, it was your breakthrough. They mistook your distance for confusion. But it was clarity. Pure and final. You weren't retreating, you were recalibrating, cutting the weight, sharpening the vision, and rising into a level where noise can't survive. That's what happens when a man finds peace in his own presence. He stops explaining himself to the world. He stops entertaining low-energy demands. He stops responding just to be understood. Instead, he becomes surgical with his focus, precise with his time, guarded with his energy, because when you've built yourself in silence, when you've rebuilt your mind without applause, you stop chasing approval and start demanding alignment. Only what matches your mission gets in. Everything else gets silence. And they feel that. They feel the absence of access. They feel the emptiness of not being able to pull you back. They feel the weight of being muted in your life. Not blocked, just outgrown. That's what hurts the most. Not being shut out in anger, but being left behind by elevation. And while they obsess over how to get a response, you're giving your energy to purpose, to discipline, to building a life that speaks for itself. No announcements, no permission, no performance. You walk into rooms now with a different frequency. You don't need to prove, you don't need to respond, because people feel it. They feel that you're not looking for attention. You are the attention. That's the ultimate power of silence. It creates space, space for growth, space for space that forces them to confront what they lost, not through confrontation, but through complete, unshakable absence. And when your silence is rooted in truth, in strength, in direction, there's no comeback they can offer that changes anything. Because by the time they realize what your silence meant, you've already become someone they can't reach again. And that's what truly breaks them. Not the silence itself, but the finality of it. The realization that you didn't pause the conversation, you ended the connection. Not with rage, not with drama, but with maturity, with grace, with stillness. That said, I'm done giving energy to what drains me. That's when it hits them. You were never trying to punish them. You were just done explaining yourself to people, committed to misunderstanding you. Done wasting breath on empty ears. Done giving access to people who only valued your presence when they thought it was permanent. And now that it's gone, now that the line has gone cold, now that you don't react, don't reach out, don't check in, don't reply, they realize the truth. You were the constant. You were the foundation. You were the quiet strength in the background, holding it together while they took it for granted. And now that you've stepped away, everything's different. They scroll through the memories. They replay old conversations. They revisit the exact moment when things changed. But they can't find your voice in it anymore. Because it's gone. Because you're gone. And that silence, it doesn't just echo, it redefines the space you used to fill. You didn't just stop talking. You evolved, you elevated, you disappeared into discipline. And that discipline became your message, your power, your legacy. So while they obsess, you operate. While they regret, you rebuild. While they chase closure, you chase clarity. Because you're not available for the old version of life anymore. You've stepped into a chapter that doesn't start with noise. It starts with quiet dominance. No more reacting, no more explaining, no more entertaining anything beneath your purpose. Only moves, only growth, only momentum. And they'll keep wondering if they'll ever hear from you again, but you've already answered. Through your silence, and that silence said everything. And that truth will echo louder than any final word ever could. Because what they never realized, until it was too late, is that silence is an absence. It's arrival. The arrival of a man who no longer needs to be heard to be understood. A man who speaks through action, who leads with discipline, who doesn't seek closure, because he became it. You see, when you walk away in silence, you reclaim every part of yourself you gave away for free. Your peace, your focus, yourself. And when you stop handing that out, when you stop over-explaining, over-giving, overextending, you stop attracting chaos. Instead, you attract clarity, opportunity, and peace so strong, it unnerves the very people who used to drain you, because they can feel this shift. They can feel that you no longer orbit their validation, that your silence isn't passive. It's chosen, and anything chosen has power behind it. They'll call it ego. They'll say you changed, and they're right too. Did you become a man rooted in purpose? A man who moves with weight, not in his words, but in his absence. And now, your silence holds more authority than their noise ever could, because you're no longer seeking to be understood. You're seeking to be aligned with mission, with growth, with a future they're not built for. So you let them obsess. Let them wonder if you ever think about them. Let them stare at the blank space where your energy used to live. Because the reality is, you're too far ahead now to even look back. And every day they sit in that silence. They learn a little more. It wasn't your voice that made you powerful. It was your ability to walk away without needing to be heard, without needing to be chased. Because real men don't chase closure. They create it in silence, in stillness, in the power of no longer responding to anything beneath who they've become. And that's when they truly understand. You were never trying to be distant. You were just done shrinking. Done dimming your light to make others comfortable. Done explaining your standards to people who had none. Done showing up for those who only noticed your value after you were gone. You didn't go silent to punish anyone. You went silent to protect everything you were building. Your mindset, your mission, your momentum. Because peace isn't found in confrontation. It's found in separation, in elevation, in disconnection from the things that used to pull you off course. And now, they feel the full weight of what your presence actually meant. Not when you were talking, not when you were giving, but now that you're gone, now that you've stopped responding, they finally start listening. Not to your words, but to your actions, to the fact that you never came back, to the fact that your silence wasn't temporary. It was transformational. You didn't just pull away, you leveled up. And when a man levels up in silence, there's no announcement, no goodbye, just distance, just results. Just a new version of him that doesn't even fit in the old world anymore. That's what they can't shake. That the access they wasted is now locked forever. That the energy they overlooked is no longer theirs to feel. That the man who once gave freely now gives selectively, and only to those who match his direction, not just his history. So let them talk. Let them assume. Let them project. Because nothing they say will open a door that silence already sealed. You're not angry, you're focused. You're not bitter, you're better. You're not waiting for them to catch up. You're building a life so far ahead, they wouldn't recognize you even if they saw you again. And that is the final echo of silence. Not that they miss you, but that they can never reach you again, because the man they once knew no longer exists.